We know scope 1, scope 2 is really about what you're doing, right? Your direct emissions or indirect. Scope 3 is what your suppliers are doing. Much, much more challenging. It's kind of like at the dinner table, right? I can decide to eat my vegetables, but can I get the kids to eat the vegetables, right? So it's kind of the same idea. So let's dive right into it. We'll start with Jacqueline at Boeing. I can only imagine how many suppliers and how many parts go into a 737. But how are you managing this whole challenge around scope 3?
Right. Thanks, David, and hello, everyone. And it's really a mammoth task, as you mentioned. So with scope 3, we're working both ends of the upstream and downstream ends of the supply chain. Where upstream, we've got our suppliers' code of conduct, working with the diverse range of suppliers on really building the awareness for sustainability, ensuring the accountability, the reporting, and as well as the governance around it. So we're working with partners like CDP, the International Aerospace Environmental Group as well, to make sure that the entire ecosystem is very much a whole of industry approach, really. And so we want to continue to take those efforts forward and work with all of the supply chain to ensure that the sustainability is built into all of our products as well.
Yeah, let's bring Maurizio in here. You're a whole different industry, from chocolates to Oreo cookies to clarets you've got today.
Yes.
How are you managing it at Mondelēz?
I mean, you said rightly, and I have 2 kids, but on scope 3, we have many kids. As a company, we started to obviously measure scope 1 and scope 2 since many, many years. And I think this helped us to be ready to measure scope 3. We have the ambition to reduce to zero our carbon emission by 2050. And 94% of our emission are on scope 3. So we really need to work end to end, from the field to the shelf, together with our suppliers, as you said as well, Jacqueline, and making sure that we address this in the right way. We started obviously to measure scope 3 as well and to create targets. 2050 seems to be very far away, but it's behind the corner. And I would say the most challenging part for us is to manage raw materials. 70% of our scope 3 are in 4 raw materials. That's why we started our own sustainable ingredient sourcing program, like Cocoa Life or Harmony Wheat or sustainable palm oil, that is really helping us to work with our suppliers to reduce scope 3. And then there is logistics, but I'm more than happy to go deeper later, so we give a little bit of room for you as well.
94%, that's just
yes.
Astounding, right? It gives you the sense of the magnitude of the challenge. Esther, real estate, a little bit different, but similar challenges. How is CDL coping in this?
Yeah, well, good morning, everyone. Yeah, definitely, this is probably the most challenging subject. And I would say that we actually learn by doing. Okay, we've been committed to green building since early 2000s, and we seriously really deep dive into the subject of scope 3 when we actually planned to apply to SBTI, Science-Based Target Initiative, in 2016. So that is when, the scope 3 came into our life, which is like a challenging part of our life. So we are not just looking at scope 1 and 2, but we have to really study and understand the 15 categories of the scope 3. And of course, as a building, developer, building owners, and a sizable group, you have to. Actually, the biggest items is not just the building materials; it's actually our subsidiaries' operations, including our buildings, commercial buildings, and also the hotel operations and all, because their scope 1 and 2 is the parent company's scope 3. And it's like a huge thing. It's like a family tree of a big clan. This is the parent, and then you don't know which DNA you are connected to, and then you end up, you're like, oh, this is also my responsibility. Subsidiary and supplier and contractor, almost everything they do, even tenants, it's also my scope 3. Hello, this is growing bigger and bigger. So, I mean, we are still learning by doing it, and it doesn't help that some of the standards are still expanding. If you look at greenhouse gas protocol, they have the corporate standard, they have the value chain, supply chain standards, they have product standard. So it's our life as sustainability professional is getting tougher and tougher. And of course, plus all the reporting frameworks and standards, not that many, 600 over only, It's quite a scary life, for sustainability. But of course, joke aside, it's not the more the merrier. We have to choose those that really, capture the impact of our business, that is materials to our business, to our investors and stakeholders. Yeah.
Yeah. And let's talk about, Jacqueline, some of the pitfalls in measuring all this, because it really comes down to data, doesn't it? My boss, Mike Bloomberg, would say, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So how are you coping with this array of data you need to in order to measure what you've got, right?
Absolutely. So I think on the supply chain side, that is absolutely such a challenging task, as Esther mentioned. The range of reporting requirements and the metrics that are being used. But I think another really key way for us to look at our scope 3, and our scope 3 is very much, the bulk of it is use of products, use of sold products. And the largest part of it is how do we work with our airline partners as well. That's their scope 1 and 2 emissions, and how are we working with them to ensure that through fleet renewal, for example, that they're reducing up to 25% of their carbon footprint, and through operational efficiency that they'll be reducing up to 15% of their carbon emissions as well. But really the largest lever that we are trying to collectively work on as an industry is the energy transition in the use of aircraft from Jet A kerosene to sustainable aviation fuel, which will allow up to 80% of carbon emissions reduction. And so these are the types of metrics that we'd be looking at, as an industry to really actively bring down the scope 3 from the Boeing perspective, but working very closely downstream with the airlines on the use of the sold product on their end as well.
Right. Just to follow on that, it kind of comes back to the vegetable analogy, if I may. How do you, force an airline to get rid of an old jet? I mean, it's perfectly fine. It's 20 years old, but
well,
it's not as efficient, clearly.
Right now, with the kerosene prices, the jet fuel prices, there's a huge incentive because the energy efficiency, the engine efficiency that it brings with the new fleet, there's immediate cost savings for the airlines as well that's involved. And as we continue, as Boeing continues to work towards our target for 100% SAF compatibility across all our aircraft models, that also helps the airlines make that decision to buy the newer aircraft models that can, at a later stage, be compatible with as much SAF as they want to put into their engine. That will help them, have the largest impact in reducing their carbon emissions reduction at fuel combustion point, which is for them their largest scope 1 and scope 2 emissions as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Maurizio, how are you? Just what are the pitfalls as you look at the data landscape, as you're trying to measure this? What are some of your challenges?
Yeah, as I said before, for us it's mainly agriculture. So the sourcing of the ingredients in the right weight is very, very important. Obviously, as you said, we are part of the SBTi, and we join as well all the other races that are happening there to make sure that we help each other. As a big company, we can have our own sustainable ingredient programs. Cocoa Life is a very important program, and we plan to have by 2025 100% of the cocoa that we need for our chocolate brands sourced through Cocoa Life. And this is obviously helping the emission, but as well helping the life of the people that are growing cocoa. Same on wheat. By the end of this year, Europe will be 100% on the Harmony Wheat program. It is a program that is preserving biodiversity in the way our partners are growing wheat, sustaining, obviously, or reducing the use of water, reducing the emission. And I think this is a very important part as well. Sustainability is also part of one of our 4 pillars of the long-term growth strategy. So everyone in the organization, at senior leader, we are incentivized, obviously, to make sure that not only we set targets, but we reach those targets. And there is a strong governance as well at management level, at board level, a governance that we started, like you, more than, I would say, almost a decade ago, since the beginning of this company, Mondelēz International, 10 years ago. And lastly, we have to work as well on logistics, because 70% is ingredient, but we have around 10% on logistics as well. And logistics means optimization of routes, the way we fill in containers and truck, the ability to use truck that are with different fuel, sure, and not the fuel of today. So it's complex. I try to simplify. It is comprehensive, but I think Scope 1 and Scope 2 measuring process and targets helped and are helping us to make sure that we are efficient and effective in reducing Scope 3 as well, which, as I said, is almost all outside our company.
Right, right. So challenging. Esther, how are you managing the data minefield?
That is actually when we first started 15 years ago, we started our sustainability reporting. And at that time, really very single-minded. Okay, GRI 36 indicator. Okay, can be done, tick boxing and all that. But over time, you have to learn. It's like, hey, it's not just about ticking boxes and all that. And I think the turning point is actually 2010 when we actually report to CDP. Okay, that is when we started to really deep dive into collecting carbon data, energy data, and also try to make sense of it, to learn about it. And I think SBTi, it's actually one of the most difficult tasks that I have achieved in my whole journey of 27 years in sustainability. It took us almost 9 months to, get the first set of our carbon reduction target validated by the scientists. 8 to 9 months almost can make a baby. It was difficult because the scientists really look at numbers, past data, current number, and also the projection, whether it makes sense, whether it's ambitious enough. The whole idea of SBTi is to push you to, set ambitious targets so that you will find solutions to do it. Human, issue that if someone is ripping you behind, you will work harder on innovations and technology, which actually it really helps when you track data, because we have a whole ecosystem. And mind you, building and construction activities globally account for 40%, more than 40% now, greenhouse gas emission. And not just how you design and build, but operation of existing building is the biggest challenge. Yeah, so especially the older building. So Race to Zero now has already garnered support of almost supporters, organizations, cities, and regions that account for about 91% of the global GDP. So it is going to be a big movement. You like it or not, you have to, get on the bus. So how do you measure? What do you measure? What are the scope? And how specific you should be, because you can't just say that, oh, I pledge for net zero. And I will tell you whether I can achieve it by 2050, right? You won't get away because annually you have to submit, data to SBTi. And when we pledged to SBTi in 2018, it was 2-degree warmer scenario alignment. And last year, after 3 years, because we pledged to 1.5 degree, and we actually raised the bar to align with 1.5. So all the data has to be more aggressive already. And last February, we also pledged to net zero using the World Green Building Council framework. And when a company pledges to net zero, you have to be specific. Otherwise, you will be deemed as like greenwashing. And just like Maurizio said, our Scope 3 account for more than 90%. So that is because we have quite a sizable, international operation, hotels, 130 over hotels. So we have to account for all the operation. That's why it accounts for so much, 90% of our overall carbon.
And of course, you're referring to the SBTi, the Science-Based Targets Initiative. It's such an alphabet soup, all this ESG stuff. So it's good to explain what we're talking about. So this whole push around climate change is about changing behavior, isn't it, for all of us, whether it's individuals or companies or governments. It'd be great if you could each give us an example of what behavior you have changed at your company as a result of the challenges around Scope 3? What have you done differently?
Thanks, David. Yeah, I think really because of the need to partner with airlines in reducing the Scope 3 emissions on use of sold products, we've been working, very, very closely with them, especially on the, not just with the airlines, but also with the energy sector on the energy transition for aviation from fossil to sustainable aviation fuel. So on the airlines front, we've been working on, aggregating demand through book and claim SAF credits, for example, and Boeing has made our own SAF purchase, 2 million gallons last year with Epic Fuels for our own operations. So we see that there is a very much a need for multi-industry effort. So we're working on scaling demand, but we're also working on scaling supply of sustainable aviation fuel through some of our investments, for example, partnerships with Sky Energy, with Alders Fuel, and around the region, there's been a lot of advocacy around looking at, well, Asia Pacific by 2050 can actually be the global leading producer of sustainable aviation fuel. The projection is at about 170 million tons by 2050, compared to Europe and the US at about 90 million tons, 76 million tons each. So how do we, get Asia Pacific to be that global producer of sustainable aviation fuel, and how do we work with governments in terms of advocacy, enabling policy frameworks to be in place, and that's one of the big areas that we've been. You probably noticed if you're following Boeing's social media posts, etc. In the last 12, 18 months, there's been a big push towards an industry-wide sort of embracing of sustainable aviation fuel to really tackle that Scope 3 work and bringing down the emissions for industry as a whole.
Wow, that sounds very ambitious, but heartening at the same time. Maurizio?
Yeah, I mean...
what are you doing differently?
Yes, I mean, for us, it's many years that we report officially. We have a sustainability report, so everything is very transparent, and I think this is very important, both internally and externally. As I said before, we have our own sourcing program, but as a company, we are as well partnering with other companies. A supplier of an ingredient is obviously a supplier of another company, maybe a competitor as well. So given the size of our company, we were and we are very open to continue to work and partner with companies and also with governments to make sure that we join the effort to really reduce Scope 3 emission. As I said before, part of the strategy, so I am managing the strategy for the region, and sustainability is something that we discuss very, very often. It is a cost, as we know, so it's something that is not coming for free. And I think embracing this and really working hard to find a solution that could offset the cost and reach maybe even higher reduction on Scope 3 is something that is challenging and really giving our people the opportunity to lean in and participate. Especially for the young generation, is very important. A company with the right value, right ambition, and the right vision on sustainability. And in many interviews, I have people asking me, or newcomers, what are we really doing? That's why we continue to communicate internally and externally.
Right.
And then there is deforestation, which obviously is very, very important, and we want to reduce it, and this is what we are doing with the sourcing program that I explained before. So right. It is, I would say, something that has been accelerated in the last 2-3 years. Scope 1 and Scope 2 was always there, but for us, I wouldn't say it's simpler, but it's simpler. Scope 3 is more challenging, so we need the help of everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Esther, what have you done differently at CDL?
Well, I think changing mindset is difficult, but imparting skill set is as challenging. And today we have this, climate emergency. You can't just slowly teach a person to change their behavior. We have gone past that stage already. So we look at the most important thing is we all make sure the whole value chain, the whole ecosystem of internal and external stakeholders are going to the right direction. So the first pillars that we look at is integration. ESG in the good old days are always, described as non-financial. So this has been thrown out of the window already. Anything to do with ESG, it has a financial impact. So integration is very important, and sustainability is not a good to have. It has to be truly integrated into the whole business strategy, and not just today, but the growth strategy as well. And I'm really, really very fortunate that I only report to the Board Sustainability Committee, playing a strategic role, not an operational role. So integration is very important. And how do you engage a larger ecosystem of the, we have the architect, engineer, suppliers, contractor. How do you change behavior? How do you offer solutions? That is most important. Then the second thing is you have to really put money where your mouth is. Investment. Yes, just now you talk about cost, but we try not to call it a cost, right? We call it an investment. There's ROI that's coming back. So the third one is enabler. You need to innovate, because now risk mitigation is not enough. You need to really fast track the innovation, technology, solutions. Without that, you can't move the needle fast enough towards net zero. And last but not least, the last I is actually impact. You must know whatever you do, there is positive or negative impact. That is where the beauty of measurement come in. When you measure scope 3, because it it actually contributed by the whole value chain of ecosystem. And we become very calculative now. Everything we use, the energy, light, aircon, everything we calculate very clearly. Otherwise, you don't have the data to help you identify gaps and the hotspots. And without that, you can't come up with solutions or technology. Just to give you one big example, traditionally, construction activities, we have temporary diesel engines to power all the activities round the clock, right? So we have actually successfully supported one of the very good technology. CESS is construction energy system, storage system. CESS, storage system, a lot of acronym. So instead of using diesel, so it actually used, cleaner energy. And because of technology, it actually, the first phase of our pilot in one of our projects helped us to reduce carbon footprint by 85% and also save costs by about 23%. So the way to drive change is there is a business case, whether for procurer or for contractor, and also can reduce carbon footprint. And now we see it as very positively that, we are not at the tipping point, we are at the changing point, because there are a lot of enabler. There are technology, there are solutions, and there is also funds. There are more increased, ESG funds. There are also sustainable finance that can really accelerate action.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I want to just, in the last few minutes, touch on the regulatory framework. You talked about SBTi, there's a carbon disclosure project. Do each of you think there's a need for sort of a global uniform standard? Is it even possible? And should there be perhaps some distinction or different standards in a region like Asia, where the economies and the countries are not as developed, perhaps, in some ways, as the West? What's your sense of that, Jacqueline?
I think to a large extent, harmonization, and as we saw earlier in the taxonomy session, harmonization is going to be so important for leveling the playing field, and to a large extent, there is a need to take into account differentiated stages of development across the various economies. But where a larger global framework is concerned, there's a very clear need for harmonization. For example, in the aviation sector, there's an ongoing discussion, for example, where in measurement of the aviation sector emissions, in the CORSIA discussions with the UN Aviation Organization, ICAO. And there is, the discussion right now is, what baseline do we take? And of course, different jurisdictions, the progressive ones, are thinking, 2020 would be a great baseline, because basically to start from there would be right in the middle of COVID, where emissions were at an all-time low, and of course the discussion is for the developing economies to look at different, more accommodating baselines. So there's discussions like this that really help us center our focus on what the broader industry journey needs to look like, and that everybody needs to be brought along on that journey. And if not everyone can use the framework to measure, to account for progress, and to reach the final objective, then we're going to not be able to reach the endpoint together in the same way, and take the same concerted efforts. So to me, you know, harmonization of measurement and accounting is really important in helping us get to the endpoint together as a global community. Thank you.
Yes, well put. Maurizio, quickly?
Yeah, I mean, as Jacqueline said, from my side, obviously, the last call is with the expert, but there are already many standards, many measurements. And if you would ask me, being a multinational, the best will be to have standardization across. So we can talk the same language, we can have the same KPIs. And I think also company reporting sustainability like ours can use a narrative which is clearly understood. Specific to Asia, since there are many global standards, I don't think we need a different standard for Asia. That is the recommendation from the business, because if every country is starting to do their own, it is difficult. And we see already a little bit of a tendency to close in from many countries on many other things, and I wish that on something that is so relevant like our planet, we can have one voice, same standards, same measures, and transparency. So that's what I would say.
Esther?
Well, of course, it's my wish, you know, for the current harmonization of reporting standards to make really a game changer, you know, progress. But being you know, having done 15 reports, I can really say that there's no one size fits all because of the diversity of geographic, you know, markets, sectors, and all that. But I think harmonization is possible because, in fact, before all this harmonization standard, we already created our own blended framework, but it's a painful framework. We have GRI, SASB, CDSB, IIRC, TCFD, you know, SDG, GRESB, so you name it, we have it. So now you are already seeing progress. IRC and SASB already merged, and CDSB as well coming together. So we hope that my hope is on the twin pillar, GRI and SASB, because we need to look at not just the investor, very important, but we also look at the larger stakeholders as well. Yeah, so we have to look at, I wouldn't want to split hair around E, S, or G. I like TCFD because governance, risk management is fundamental. It applies to environmental or social, you know, sustainability. I like the part about, you know, matrix and standards is given, and strategy is very important, because if your ESG is not strategically integrated into your whole business strategy, future-proof your business, and also operations, day-to-day operations, you won't make any progress. So the strategy part is very important. So I'm really hopeful. We just submitted our comments to IISB, the exposure drafts, you know. So hopefully we will see progress, but it won't happen, you know, too soon that you will have one standard that fit the whole world, every industry. I'm not too hopeful for that, but if we are going to the right directions.